Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we are going to be talking about Above the Law on DVD. Above the Law was made in 1988 and directed by Andrew Davis, with a story by Davis and Steven Seagal, as well as a screenplay by Steven Pressfield, Ronald Shusett, and Andrew Davis. And it was also the very first film to star Steven Seagal. And as far as Steven Seagal movies go, this is definitely one of his better ones, but whether it's actually good or not, that depends on you, the viewer. So the story of Above the Law begins with the character of Nico Toscani, played by Steven Seagal, who is a former CIA operative who did intelligence work during the Vietnam War, but he ended up leaving the CIA due to his disillusionment with their underhanded tactics, as well as the fact that they took actions that basically put them on the same level as a lot of the people they were trying to shut down. And so fast forward a few years later, he ends up becoming a cop, and a very good one. He's well regarded by his colleagues as well as the citizens of the neighborhood he's a part of, and he has a good family life with a wife and child, and basically he's things are going well for him. He cares about his work, he cares about the people under his jurisdiction, and he cares about doing the right thing. And he works well and plays well with his colleagues in the Chicago Police Department. But one day, he's involved in a drug bust wherein he and his partners, Jax or Delores Jackson, as played by Pam Grier, and Lukich, as played by Ronald, and several other members of the Chicago Police Department, make this bust. They don't necessarily find what they were looking for. They find not only drugs, but they also find C4, basically military-grade, weaponry. And the fact that that your ordinary drug runners in this particular deal had military-grade weaponry is enough to, be a game changer. But unfortunately, the people involved in the operation, namely the criminals, are turned loose by orders from on high. And so it turns out that the FBI was working with some of these drug dealers to be a part of sort of like a bigger game. Like they were wanting to take down other parties within the drug trade. But it also turns out that this all ties into a larger conspiracy, in that the person doing the bankrolling for the drug operation was a man named Zagon, who was played by Silva. And Zagon, in fact, has a history with Toscani back from their CIA days together. And it turns out that Zagon was a CIA operative who specialized in chemical interrogations and torture of prisoners. And he was one of the reasons why Nico Toscani ended up leaving the CIA. And when he finds out that Zagon is back in action and has been essentially given free reign within the CIA, Toscani decides to go on a crusade against the forces at work within this dark branch of the government. And so he alternates between going one-man crusade as well as accepting help from his partners. But unfortunately, this is one of those instances where, due to the connections that Zagon has within the CIA, he's able to manipulate the FBI and have them come after Toscani as well as his family, to a point of, say, Toscani has to get his family moved to somewhere else for their own safety, and he continues to press on with this mission to take out Zagon and the people he works for. But that's the basic gist of the movie, the basic story of it. as best as I could recollect it, because on one hand, this movie definitely has ambition, but on the other hand, I think it tends to be overly complicated at times in terms of plot elements. And this is one of those things where the ambition definitely helps the movie to stand out from other action movies. But at the same time, if you're trying to tell what the movie's about with someone, I mean, on one hand, it's definitely more involved than, say, your typical Steven Seagal movie. But on the other hand, though, with all the plot elements that are thrown in, or plot twists that are thrown in to some degree, it makes the movie more confusing than it needs to be, I think. I mean, a little bit of confusion until, say, the character finds out the twist is one thing, but to where all these elements are constantly being introduced, it does make it hard to keep track of what's going on at times. But nonetheless, it's a well done movie. Good police drama as well as a action flick, and I was very surprised at how well done the movie was, which, I mean, in some ways, I guess I shouldn't be, because Andrew Davis, a Chicago native, has proven that he's really good at directing action movies. He directed Code of Silence, which was definitely one of martial artist Chuck Norris's best movies. And had things gone differently, I honestly think that if Chuck Norris had continued on the path that Code of Silence seemed to open up for him, courtesy of Andrew Davis, I really think that Chuck Norris could have been like somewhere in the territory of an A-list actor. That being said, Andrew Davis kind of did a repeat here, in which he directed a martial artist in a starring role in a Chicago environment, and he actually did a very good job of making Steven Seagal look good, not only visually, but as, say, an actor. And I have to give some credit here, because not only does the Chicago environment, make the story look a lot more unique, simply because of Andrew Davis's knowledge of the Chicago area, but Steven Seagal here actually does a pretty decent job as far as acting goes. I mean, yes, you could definitely see shades of what's to come with his later performances, unfortunately. A lot of he does have some low spoken dialogue at times, when maybe enunciating would do him a little better. Some forced humor, or I guess you could say some awkward delivery when it comes to the humor at times, as well as, yes, unfortunately, he does run like a girl here. That being said, though, he's actually trying. And granted, a lot of that could be because it's his first movie and he wanted to make a good impression. But the fact is, he actually makes an effort, and it really shows up on screen, to a point where a few awkward comedic deliveries aside, he actually has pretty good chemistry with those he's working with, especially actors Pam Grier as his partner Delores Jackson, or Jax, as well as Ron Dean as Lukich. And basically it's just, and he even works well with Sharon Stone, who has a small part as his wife. And it's a really very much a surprise to see him actually having some form of solid chemistry with those he's acting with, because most of the time, he has as much chemistry as, cardboard, as cliche as it sounds. But here he definitely showed that he had some potential. And there were even moments where, when the occasion calls for his character to, basically get emotionally invested in something, he really brings forth a certain amount of anger, like a sort of righteous anger to the situation. I mean, because of the situation and certain revelations that come to light that really come across as a lot more believable than you'd expect. And, this this effort that Seagal puts into his character actually makes Nico Toscani not only stand out in comparison to, say, most of the other roles that Seagal has played over the years, which unfortunately all tend to be one note for the most part, but it also makes you, the audience, pull for Toscani, because he finds himself in a situation that keeps spiraling even more and more out of control, but he's determined to, be this one resolute obstacle that, those forces within the CIA can't just, brush aside and, go about their day. I mean, even if they do kill him, they're going to have some marks on them. And so, yeah, so basically just, this is, in terms of straight up acting, I would say that his role as Nico Toscani was definitely Seagal's best work. Not award winning, but I mean, he shows a lot more range than you would expect. I mean, considering, the performances that were to follow, over the years. But here, though, it's a genuine surprise. I mean, one, if this is literally your very first Steven Seagal movie to see, I mean, you could definitely tell that he had potential here. Not only, say, in the action scenes, but in terms of the acting. And if you've already seen a crap ton of other Seagal movies, but you haven't seen Above the Law, and you go ahead and watch it after having seen all these others, I mean, you're probably going to be like, damn, he was actually pretty good, in terms of acting. So yeah, if you're into Seagal, or if you're curious about Seagal, Above the Law is definitely one of the better movies to check out. And also, if you like a good crime drama or a good police story, with a gritty urban environment that was Chicago and probably still is Chicago, Above the Law delivers in spades. And I also, I do like the fact that it had a certain rebellious element to it, in a sense that it was, basically trying to call attention. The movie seemed to be trying to call attention to, say, crimes that organizations like the CIA had committed over the years, or at the very least had been a party to over the years. Because I'm one of those people, I guess you could say, that America is my country. I was born here. I was raised here. I love it. But I also realized that there is a lot wrong with this country. And so I do appreciate the fact that this film seemed to, show that to some degree. Like, it showed, the optimism of, what it is to be, an American citizen, in the sense that, Nico Toscani, I mean, he's had a varied life, but at the same time, like, he's able to have a life, he's able to have, a good family life. He's able to, be a part of a job that, allows him to do good work. And, it's really, I mean, you get a shot of, what it's like to have, an opportunity in America. But on the other hand, though, you see the downside of America, in the sense that organizations like the CIA tend to get away with stuff on a regular basis. And, while it's one of those, it could be one of those big moral gray areas. I mean, there's no denying that the CIA has been involved in shady stuff over the years. And so to see an action movie like this done as, competently as it was, basically point the finger at the CIA, I mean, it makes the movie stand out for sure. Now, granted, there does seem to be a bit of a mixed feeling in terms of, Steven Seagal's character being the one to point the finger at the CIA, considering all the stuff that's come to light about him over the years. I mean, he's lied about so much of what he's done in real life. Like, he's claimed to actually have done CIA work at some point or another, and he claims to, I mean, basically just a whole bunch of crazy things. And, you know, in the age of information, it's pretty easy to track down and find out, you know, what's real and what's not. And also, Steven Seagal, unfortunately, turned out to be, you know, something of, you know, pervert and sexist over the years, you know, with all these, you know, women coming, you know, to the forefront to tell that, you know, hey, he tried to do this or that or the other to me. So yeah, on one hand, it's cool that this movie, you know, is actually, you know, having the guts to, you know, try and call out the CIA for its part in, you know, all these dark, you know, deeds in America over the years. But it's just, it is somewhat awkward, you know, to have Steven Seagal being the face, you know, of, you know, those who are wanting to, you know, take the CIA to task, considering what, you know, he was really like as a person. I don't know if he was really like this at this point in time, but just the person he became after this movie, it is a little awkward. But if you're able to say, you know, separate the art from the artist, or the actor from the real person, you know, or the character from the actor, I should say, then yeah, I mean, Nico Toscani is definitely a character that you can root for. I also liked the characters of Jackson, you know, Delores Jackson, as played by Pam Grier, and Lukich as Ronald played him, because the two of them actually are skilled enough actors to where they pull off, you know, their roles as detectives. And Ron Dean is actually a Chicago native, and he's played cops in many other movies, including Andrew Davis's own Code of Silence. And so there's actually a lot of familiar faces in this movie if you've seen the Chuck Norris movie Code of Silence, because I mean, since Andrew Davis likes to use, you know, his natural resources whenever he's, you know, directing something set in Chicago, you know, he tends to actually cast Chicago natives. And so if you've seen Code of Silence and then you watch Above the Law, you'll see a lot of, you know, familiar, you know, faces showing up in different roles. But anyway, though, Ron Dean and Pam Grier are both very good in this movie, and Pam Grier especially is a firecracker. And I liked how most movies like this would probably have, you know, the protagonist, say, having an affair with her character while being a quote unquote happily married family man. But I like the fact that while there is some form of playful flirtation between the two from time to time, it's the kind of flirtation that comes from, say, you know, a man and a woman who happen to be, you know, work partners, but genuinely good friends, if that makes sense. And the chemistry between the two of them is actually pretty good, and that could definitely be a case of, you know, Pam Grier is just a good actress, you know, naturally, and as she's proven over the years. And so maybe Seagal, you know, along with the stressor of this being his first movie, was like, hey, I'm actually with a good actress here, I need to step up my A game. So whenever he's with her, like, there's a good form of camaraderie. And the same with Ron Dean and his character. And so I also, while Sharon Stone doesn't have a huge part in the movie, she actually does well enough with what little she has to work with as the mostly distressed wife. But another thing I appreciated is that while Sharon Stone's definitely a looker, the people who made the movie, they didn't take, say, like, the easy route and, you know, offer a gratuitous, you know, sex scene or a topless scene, you know, with her character. It just, you know, that would have been very out of place in this movie. But no, she definitely, she didn't have a lot to do in the movie, but at the same time, she was good enough to where you could definitely see that, you know, she was an actor who could definitely go places, and she definitely did later on. But yeah, so and I guess the you know, the last person I could think of as far as say standout characters was the character of Zagon, as played by Henry Silva. And Henry Silva is one of those actors who is really good at playing bad guys. He was the main bad guy in Andrew Davis's prior movie, Code of Silence, in which Chuck Norris went up against Silva's character, and he was also in the Forrest Whitaker movie Ghost Dog, I believe is what it was called, and he was also one of the actors who played the voice of Bane on Batman the Animated Series. And he was in the Burt Reynolds movie Sharky's Machine, which is actually a pretty good crime drama. But anyway, sorry, just, it's like you see a classic actor, you kind of have to sing their praises. But no, Henry Silva, in the brief amount of time he's in this movie, does a very good job of making Zagon into a character that you want to see him die. You can definitely tell, Silva's having fun with the part, but at the same time, he's so, despicably evil that, like at one point, when he's interrogating someone, this person who's under, chemical induced, kind of like in a chemical induced state, is, saying that they told someone about how Zagon tortured mothers and children, during his time as an interrogator. And so, we find out, that something like that, that just kind of makes his character even worse. But yeah, like Silva, even though he's only in the movie for a little bit, he does a good job of making, his character's hatred of Nico Toscani very palpable. And you definitely understand why Nico Toscani's wanting to take him down. And so while I do wish that they had utilized Zagon's character more than they did, I think that once, he and Toscani have their, face-to-face confrontation, it's definitely one of the best parts of the movie because, spoiler alert, this being Seagal's first movie, this is the first time you get to see Seagal go to town on someone in terms of, say, breaking limbs and what have you. And it is beautiful. Just from a sheer action standpoint. And I think one of the reasons why, another reason why this movie stands out is that, in comparison to, say, other Seagal movies, is that, okay, so Nico Toscani is established as a badass, and yes, there's all sorts of hallmarks that, come to play, say, in other Seagal movies, like, he's a former Vietnam vet, he's a former Black Ops, blah, 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 he's the best there is in his field and all that, but the movie does take some form of pain to show that, while yes, he is a certified badass, and everyone loves him, except for those that he's going up against, he's human. He's flesh and blood. He has problems like anyone else. But mainly to a point where, he's held at gunpoint to where he's not able to get out of the situation, and he's, taken by Zagon and his goons at the climax of the movie, and he's restrained and tortured, and to a point where, say, you actually see Steven Seagal take a couple of hits to the face and get bloody from it. That's not something you see in most of Seagal's other movies. And so when Seagal, gets, as other reviewers had pointed out, on the occasion that Seagal gets Seagal's character gets his second wind in this movie at the climax and goes postal on Zagon and his goons, it actually looks believable because he's not the invincible hero that he was in like other movies. Like here, he's an ordinary flesh and blood person who ends up having to, say, tap into, I guess, the reserves of anger and strength to get out of the situation he's in. And he looks bloody after the fact, and he actually has to go to a hospital afterwards. So the fact that this happened in a Seagal movie, is kind of jaw-dropping. So yeah, I know it's a bit of a geek out for sure, but seriously, if you've seen just about any other Steven Seagal movie, I mean, you're lucky if you see him, get just say a jab to the face or something like that, or just get pushed even. But now here though, it was like it was pretty brutal. I mean, his form of comeuppance on the criminals, on Zagon and his goons, was brutal, but it was also rewarding, because you'd seen and heard about them getting away with so much, and then you see his character actually being the force of justice and vengeance, taking them out. But the fact that he actually gets beat up doing it at the same time, I mean, it's definitely not something you see in every other Seagal film, and it makes Above the Law stand out that much more. So, all that being said, I mean, there's a lot to like in this movie. I mean, there's a surprisingly decent protagonist in the form of Nico Toscani, as played by Steven Seagal. There's memorable characters that surround him and make the movie more interesting, both on the law and order side of things as well as the criminal side of things, and even the civilians, like the bit players and what have you. I mean, Andrew Davis, and his casting director, I mean, whoever that was, did a really good job of populating the movie with memorable faces, even in the most minor of roles, and it just makes it feel like you're in the day of the life of say Chicago, if not the Chicago Police Department. But also the music by David Frank. If it sounds familiar, it was probably because he actually did the music for Code of Silence as well. So once again, Andrew Davis is tapping from resources in that movie to make this movie as memorable as it is. I mean, there's like a very jazz-oriented score, with some keyboards and saxophone, and it definitely goes along with the grit of the urban environment that this story is set in. And I do appreciate that while it's established that Nico has some martial arts experience, they, for the most part, focus on his work as, a police officer, in the sense of, there's physical manhandling or gunplay or detective work. And, so when you see him use his martial arts, the fact that he doesn't use his martial arts every time he turns around definitely makes the occasions that much more memorable. And especially in the climax, when he finally gets Zagon in his sights. But I will say that the thing that kind of holds this movie back, in my opinion at least, is that, as I mentioned earlier, they tried to add more plot developments or plot twists than I think they needed to, because I mean, it's already a more complex action movie than say other movies of its ilk, what with its condemning finger pointing at the CIA, but at the same time there's just other plot twists and plot elements that keep coming in, and it honestly makes the story hard to follow at times. And I hate to say that, because I mean, for the most part, the movie's done pretty well, but the fact that I actually had to rewind the movie a few times just to follow what was going on, like, it even got to a point where I had to have some subtitles. And to be fair, this is an old DVD, so yes, the sound's kind of muffled at times, but there were things that certain characters said, and at some points it was things that certain characters in the background were saying, while all the focus was on, say, maybe Seagal and Pam Grier, or Seagal and some other character talking, and so you're thinking that they're the focus of what's being you're thinking they're the ones you need to be listening to, but then it'll be like, say, a character in the background shouting or saying something, and you're thinking, okay, they're just randomly spouting off, and then later on in the movie, some that ends up coming back to, in the spotlight. And so, at that point, it gets kind of confusing, unfortunately. And I think that if maybe they had shaved off a few of those plot elements, I think that the movie would have been a lot more sleek and refined, and just in terms of story development and what have you. And also, I think that, okay, so this is where it's a little hard for me to separate the art from the artist, so to speak. But, knowing what I know about Seagal now, it did make for an awkward viewing experience because, objectively speaking, he actually does a good job in this movie. And Nico is a likable character and one worth pulling for. But at the same time, knowing what you know about him, it makes, rooting for him after the fact very awkward. And also, when you see certain mannerisms of his come into play, you can't help but think that while, Above the Law was a really good starting point for Seagal, well, you see certain hallmarks of his other films that are showing up here, but because the movie is as well done as it is, they don't come across as necessarily problems, but just if you know what's to come after this movie, you're kind of like, and so it begins. Case in point, there's a couple of scenes where, while yes, Nico Toscani is established as, say, being in good standing with, the police department, his fellow officers, as well as his community, the people who put the story together and made the movie, I think there were times where they tried to say, talk up Nico's character a little too much, because there are points where certain characters, they'll be, say, an odd conversation about Nico, saying, man, he's the best officer on the force, or something like that. And granted, on that particular moment, it's at a party that Nico and his wife are having, because their kid had just been baptized or something like that. And so, it's, okay, yeah, you can kind of give some leeway to that because, hey, it's their day, that kind of thing. But at the same time, when it happens a few other times, like certain civilians, are all like, thank you, Nico, and all this stuff. And it's like they tried too hard to make Nico into, say, this sort of ultimate paragon, I guess. Just, not so much in actions, but in terms of like how people talk about him. And so those moments, I guess, are frustrating for me because they feel sort of, as far as this particular movie goes, they feel sort of shoehorned in, as opposed to, say, natural conversation would sound like, or what a natural conversation would sound like. Because Andrew Davis, as I've mentioned, he likes to use natural resources, especially when he's filming, he's making a movie set in Chicago. And one of the things that, for the most part makes, Code of Silence and Above the Law stand out is that, he's got actual Chicago natives, and, they're talking about, life in Chicago and what have you. And so when those scenes are going on, both in the Code of Silence and Above the Law, it really feels like, you're seeing a true story unfolding almost. It's an action movie, but it feels organic. And so when you have these scenes wherein, you have characters just, like I say, in awe of Nico, it really feels forced and shoehorned in. And so, when it cuts to, say, like, Seagal and Pam Grier bantering with one another, it's almost a relief, because that actually feels like real conversation that two cops would have. And their chemistry is organic. Whereas when all these other people are just kind of talking about him, it's just shoehorned and annoying. And to be fair, it doesn't happen constantly throughout the movie, but it is there to a point where like, that doesn't really sound, it doesn't sound organic like, say, most of the rest of the movie does. As much as it could be for a Seagal movie, I should say. But at the same time, if you see it in this movie and then you watch other Seagal movies, you'll notice that tends to happen a lot. Characters tend to talk his character up, regardless of what movie it is, saying, "Oh, he's the best thing at such and such," blah 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 blah. Character shilling, and it gets really annoying. But much like you see his arm breaking in Aikido for the first time in this movie, you also see a lot of the character shilling in this movie for the first time. But yeah, so it definitely, I mean, as far as Seagal movies go, it's a solid movie. And I'm gonna go ahead and give it 3 out of 4 stars. I mean, it was a decent movie, and in some respects I wanted to give it 4 out of 5, because there are moments that genuinely do flirt with being a good movie, and it's a well done movie. For the most part, it's well acted. The action scenes are for the most part well done. And this is definitely Seagal's best role in terms of straight up acting, and he definitely seemed to have a bright future. If you hadn't seen anything that came after this movie, but unfortunately, because of how overly complicated the plot of the movie tends to be, and at least in my experience, I was having to backtrack and figure out, okay, who is that? What was going on here? Or how is this going to come into play? Or wait, who's this? That tended to kind of bring things down a little bit for me, and also just the fact that kind of knowing what I know about Seagal now, it does unfortunately mar my enjoyment of them. I mean, I enjoyed the movie, but at the same time, I just, it's like, while watching the movie, yes, I was able to pull for Nico, but after the movie, I'm kind of like, Seagal, I don't like the guy, no. But anyway, though, so yeah, it's a solid movie. It's a well done movie, and I would even say, if you can find it for cheap somewhere, I mean, it's definitely worth buying, because I mean, it's a solid late '80s action movie / crime drama, and if you're a Seagal fan, it's definitely one of his best works. But it's not as sleek as it could have been, simply because of how overly complicated it can be at times. And also, I really do wish that they had a little more focus on the character of Zagon, because like I said, Henry Silva does a good job with the character, but and when you see him, I mean, yes, you're wanting him to die and all that, which, I mean, that's what a good villain should, that's a kind of a reaction a good villain should elicit from an audience, but at the same time, they don't have him in the movie enough. Like, I really think that it probably would have been better if there'd been more focus on his character. But yeah, so a decent movie all around, comes close to being good, but is definitely a solid 3 out of 5 stars. The DVD, this is an old school DVD, so I mean, in terms of special features, I mean, you just have mainly production notes and a theatrical trailer, or trailers. But I think that as far as like the Blu-ray goes, I don't have the Blu-ray or anything, but I heard that it's essentially the same thing with the Blu-ray, which is kind of a disappointment, because I mean, you would think that one, this being Seagal's first movie, you would think that there'd be maybe some sort of commentary track or something, because I mean, especially Andrew Davis, I mean, he had the unique opportunity to work with Steven Seagal twice, once with his first movie, and then with his 5th movie, Under Siege, which is arguably the best movie Steven Seagal was in. And so the way Andrew Davis, described it, I mean, Seagal in Above the Law was kind of a big pussycat, and he was a little uncertain about things, and I mean he was eager to prove himself, but he was also willing to work and play well with others. But by the time Under Siege came around, he was kind of wise to the ways of Hollywood and in full-blown ego mode. And so the way Andrew Davis says, there's a reason that he doesn't come into the movie until like 30 or 40 minutes in, and the majority of the focus is on Tommy Lee Jones, because Under Siege, Tommy Lee Jones, walked in and stole the show. But anyway, as far as Above the Law goes, I mean, I really wish that there'd been some form of, maybe, retrospective documentary or, a commentary track, because, I mean, Seagal does have a fan base. I mean, say what you will about him, but, at the time that this movie was made, I mean, the guy was really good at martial arts. I mean, there was even a scene at the very beginning of the movie where it shows him, I think it's in Japan or something, where he's teaching an Aikido class, and he's speaking in Japanese too, so points for authenticity. But you actually see him, teaching and showing people, how to position themselves and, how to apply the technique to, throwing someone or something like that. So, I mean, it would have been interesting if, say, there'd been a retrospective or a commentary, like, say, if some, people in the martial arts world had, talked about the movie or something like that, because I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting things to say. And plus, this being Seagal's first movie, I mean, there's all sorts of, historical significance in terms of cinema. But also, just in terms of, the movie taking a shot at the CIA, and at the time this movie was made, 1988, Reagan was in office and what have you. It's just, because that definitely makes the movie stand out more, I really think that even though they overshoot the mark in terms of, say, all the needlessly, in terms of, say, the needlessly complicated plot, I do think that, the moments where you get that righteous anger directed at the CIA definitely, ring genuine. And I think that, it would have been interesting if, say, in a retrospective documentary or a commentary, maybe they'd have someone, come in and talk about it who, maybe had, done, some investigative work with, with stuff that the CIA's done over the years, and maybe like talk about other movies and point out how hey, they were kind of ahead of the time in terms of calling out the CIA on certain things. But so unfortunately, it's a bare bones DVD, but it is a solid movie, though, if not an outright good one. I mean, it's a well done movie, but it falls short of being straight up good simply because of the overcomplications. And although, in my opinion at least, that could be because of some bias in regards to knowing about Steven Seagal after this movie was made, but those of you who watch this review, as well as who watch the movie, might be able to just be wholly objective and say that, hey, this is a good action movie, regardless of what Seagal did or said or what have you after the movie. But so that was Above the Law. 3 stars out of 5. It was a decent movie, a genuinely decent movie, and I just wish that Seagal had actually put forth the effort they had in this movie into his other movies, as well as maybe kept his ego in check too, because I mean, I think that he would have had a better career as an actor, and we as an audience wouldn't feel so awkward, rooting for his character. So anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop online and let me know. If you like what you see here, please feel free to subscribe. So y'all have a good day. Bye.